Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday everyone. General Secretary Xi Jinping has returned to Beijing after an eventful week out of the country, first to Indonesia for the G20, then to Bangkok for the APEC summit. He will likely now go into self-imposed quarantine like we have seen in the past, and thus will not be seen for some time. As we saw last week, Xi's week of diplomacy went relatively smoothly, with some nice diplomatic wins which will play well with China's domestic audience. Productive conversations with US President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, a big cooperation agreement signed with Indonesia, and a dressing down of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Unfortunately for the General Secretary, however, developments domestically, as we will soon see, have not been as smooth. Hong Kong's chief executive, John Lee, has tested positive for COVID-19 just days after interacting with Xi Jinping at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in Bangkok. This, combined with Xi's likely disappearance for quarantine, may lead to rumors that he is not well. We should anticipate these rumors and our skepticism for them. First up for today, though, the outbreak situation continues to worsen, truly testing Beijing's commitment to its new, more balanced approach to zero COVID, with frustration in some places reaching boiling point. China has now recorded 3 COVID-related deaths, the first official deaths from COVID in the PRC in 6 months. The cases are surging in several critically important cities as well, including the capital, Guangzhou and Chongqing, causing them to return to, in the words of one analyst, devastating large-scale lockdowns and restrictions. New official daily case numbers are currently sitting at approximately 28,000. The capital, Beijing, has moved teaching online and urged residents from several districts, well over 10 million people, to stay at home. Zero COVID Czar, Vice Premier Sun Chunlan, has made an inspection tour of Chongqing. In Guangzhou, another district, population 3.7 million, has seen lockdown measures, suspending in-person classes for schools and sealing off universities. Almost 10 million people in the southern megacity are now directly affected by varying degrees of lockdown measures. Yesterday, the Guangdong Party Secretary, Huang Kunming, went to Guangzhou's Huangpu district to inspect the large-scale construction of temporary hospitals and quarantine facilities. Even state media is admitting that the outbreak in Guangzhou is very serious. Quote, "The infection point of the latest flare-up in Guangzhou is far from arriving, and the local cases are likely to continue to surge. An optimistic estimate is that the local outbreak can be effectively controlled in 2 months." End quote. The major northern port city of Tianjin has launched yet another citywide round of testing on Sunday. Chengdu, provincial capital of southwest China's Sichuan, is continuing its regular testing measures and is now requiring testing every 24 hours for residents wishing to not have their movements restricted. Meanwhile, there are also increasing reports of local frustration among officials, vexed by seemingly confused signaling from the center and contradictory policies. Indeed, some cities have blinked, reversing easing and turning back to stricter zero-COVID measures. Just a week after abolishing regular COVID testing and easing other virus restrictions, Shijiazhuang, a city of about 11 million people near Beijing, has suspended schools, locked down universities, and asked residents to stay at home for 5 days, according to a statement in local state media. The provincial capital of Hebei recently received attention for their quick take-up of Beijing's new, more balanced zero-COVID strategy, but has now been forced to backtrack as cases have grown exponentially in recent days. This potentially embarrassing backtrack is yet more evidence that a zero-COVID policy can only be strict or not strict. Any attempt at a middle way is no longer a zero policy. As long as officials are directed by the Politburo Standing Committee to, quote, "put life and health first," end quote, then there will be very little appetite to allow case numbers to grow too large before tightening restrictions. In this environment, there can be little revival of business or consumer confidence. State-run People's Daily this week has continued its series on the 20 so-called optimization measures. Quote, the messaging could not be clearer, and while these optimization measures are intended to be more precise and reduce the social and economic costs of dynamic zero COVID, they in no way mean there will not be lockdowns. End quote. Bishop was critical with his observations too. Quote, People's Daily published an interview with an official from the Joint Prevention and COVID Mechanism of the State Council about the parts of the 20 optimization measures on improving medical infrastructure, increasing ICU beds, and ramping up vaccinations. They really dropped the ball. All of these things should have been a priority for at least the last year. Now they are way behind. End quote. Next up, the Chinese economy. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the episode, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you'd like to support the channel, help me continue making these episodes every day, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Next up, the Chinese economy, and first for the economy, we are seeing yet more support for developers as Beijing has blinked in its showdown with the country's self-induced housing crisis. The People's Bank of China, China's central bank, is rolling out another 200 billion RMB, approximately $28 billion in loans to ensure developers can finish projects they have already sold to buyers. The central bank previously launched special loans to support unfinished property projects through two policy lenders, the China Development Bank and the Agricultural Development Bank. We remember that this response came to the shock of the so-called mortgage boycott crisis, which flared up a few months ago after households frustrated with uncompleted housing decided to not pay their mortgages, risking both social instability as well as potential stress on the wider financial system. The new 200 billion RMB lending program will be applied through the end of the first quarter of next year, with participation of 6 large state-owned banks and 12 joint stock banks. On Monday too, yesterday, the People's Bank of China and the China Banking and Insurance Regulatory Commission held a meeting to direct banks to provide more lending to the real estate industry as well as home buyers. Meanwhile, Shanghai's wealthy look nervous. Quote, An increasing number of wealthy people are looking to offload their property assets as they bet a downturn of the local home market will continue. Most of them are either considering migration or planning to allocate part of their assets overseas. End quote. Next up, on the energy front, Beijing has signed a landmark $60 billion agreement to buy liquefied natural gas, LNG, from Qatar, another move with energy security in mind. Under the deal, which will last 27 years, China's longest LNG supply agreement to date, Qatar Energy will send China's state-controlled Sinopec 4 million tons of LNG a year starting in 2026. With Europe trying to replace Russian pipeline gas with LNG, the global supply is near maxed out, with little production coming online before 2026. Qatar's energy minister, who is also head of Qatar Energy, expressed at the signing of the massive deal that it will, quote, further solidify the excellent bilateral relations between our countries, end quote, and, quote, help meet China's growing energy needs, end quote. Last year, China was the world's top LNG importer. And finally for today, carrying on with our video yesterday about China's small businesses, according to a new survey by Peking University and fintech giant Ant Group, Chinese small business owners have weaker expectations for their fourth quarter performance due to weak demand and uncertainties around zero COVID. And this is, of course, after already 3 quarters of very poor performance. According to the survey of over 20,000 business owners with an average of 5.8 workers, a measure of business confidence among micro and small companies declined to 45.5% for the fourth quarter, the lowest since the first quarter of 2021. About 58% of respondents called for optimizing the COVID policy, up from 47% the previous quarter. Quote, small businesses are to the economy what capillaries are to the human body. If you have problems, the broader economy will be affected. The data show small businesses have lower confidence in terms of demand, revenue, and employment in places where COVID PCR tests are more frequently conducted than those where they are not. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. I will see you all tomorrow.